In today's world, you have to know a little bit about OOP, object-oriented programming, to get anywhere. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. It's a bit more advanced topic, but not too advanced. So I'm assuming that you know a little bit about variables, functions, those sort of things. And we're trying to advance our knowledge into more of a practical way of coding. That way, when we want to move forward and start developing more complex applications, we'll understand how enterprise applications are developed and how the workforce utilizes object-oriented programming to be able to achieve what they achieve to make the applications that they make in the games and all that sort of thing. So what's object-oriented programming? Well, it's basically a paradigm that organizes software design around data, or let's say objects, rather than just functions and just logic. So that's the difference there. So there's several key principles that define object-oriented programming, and these principles guide developers in creating efficient, modular, and maintainable code. This allows them to create large applications and still maintain that code amongst whether it be teams or by themselves. So let's talk about these principles. There's more than four, but we're going to focus on the main four. And the main four is abstraction, polymorphism, inheritance, and encapsulation. And if you can't remember that, I have a little slide here that it makes it easy to remember it. And it's backwards though. It's API. A stands for abstraction, P polymorphism, I inheritance, and E for encapsulation. So what does these mean? What do these mean? Okay, right? I mean, these are cool words, and I'm sure you want to go take them to your friends and family and then tell them these words, and then they can be impressed. But let's understand what these things mean. Encapsulation by itself, it basically speaks for itself. It's encapsulating something, right? So it's bundling data, and in programming, that will be attributes, methods, or like functions. These things that operate on the data, they put all of that into a single unit called a class or an object. And I'm going to give you an analogy that might help you understand this a little bit more. So I just want to just say it right now as I know it, and then I'll say it in a way that makes it more clear for you to understand it. So inheritance allows one class, that would be the subclass, to inherit attributes and methods from another class, which will be the superclass. That's the class on top, right? So it would be no different than you inheriting something from someone. The classes are doing that. This promotes code reusability. It allows you to create hierarchies of classes. So a subclass can extend the functionalities of a superclass and even have its own functionality, but also extend the functionality of the superclass. Polymorphism allows objects of different classes to be treated as objects of common superclasses. And what does that mean? It basically means that you can have something like the plus symbol. When you're using it with integers, it will simply do addition. When you're using it with text or strings, it would do something called concatenation, meaning it will just put the text together instead of trying to do a calculation. That's polymorphism. And if you want to think about it, it would be like having a different behavior depending on the context based on a specific implementation. And the final one is abstraction. Abstraction involves hiding complex implementation, hiding those details of how your class is working, and only exposing the essential features of your class. So, in essence, if I had a class that represented a car, okay, so I only want to expose the brakes, the radio, the steering wheel, the gas, the ignition, those interfaces. I don't want the user of the car to have to see the engine while they're driving it, although I want the engine to still be there. So I encapsulate that engine, and I only give the user an abstraction of the engine, like the brakes or the gas and the ignition and the steering wheel and those sort of things. Those will be abstractions of the complexity of the car, of the engine itself. So that's how we can view those things. And an easy way, I think I said before, would be to memorize it as a pi. So at the heart of all of this is classes. So when we're looking at this from a distance, a class will hold all your variables, all your methods, your functions, and that sort of thing, right? So if you look at this blue circle here, that would be the class. And then inside that circle are the public variables and methods. Public meaning it can be accessed by another class or some code outside of here. It doesn't have to be a class. Whatever is trying to access it, it's available here. And then the class also has some private variables here. And these can't be accessed by anything outside. So these private variables are probably some calculations or whatever you need or whatever the inner workings of your class that doesn't need to be seen by the outside world. They just need access to the variable. So we have here an animal class. That animal class can have these other classes that inherit from the animal class. So from animal, you can create a dog, you can create a cat, you can create a cow, so on and so forth. So like I said before, people interchange object and classes, but let's actually look at really what it means. Okay, so let's say if I have this blueprint. This blueprint will tell me how to create something, whether it be a house, whether it be anything, right? So that's what the blueprint does. Now, if I were to go ahead and create something from this, let's say like a car or anything. Let me get a picture of a car. All right, so here I have my blueprint of a car. And then what that will do is I'll create a car. So the blueprint itself here, this will be the class. So I'm going to go here. This is my class. So this tells me how to make a car. Once the car is made, I have an object here. And you can see that there. It says object, right? Object and class. So that if you really want to get down to the true definition of the two of these, a class is obviously the blueprint. It doesn't really exist. And then an object is actually the real, the object instance of it, and it represents a real world entity. All right, so before we get started with anything, it's important that we focus on our documentation. So I'm assuming, let's say I already have a story, I already have a character, I already have an application idea or a utility idea or whatever I'm going to be developing. That's already done. I already have my team in place, let's say. Or maybe I don't have my team in place. I'm going to come up with the idea, and I'm going to get my team to be able to complete the idea. All those are fine. So I'm assuming, let's just assume that those things were done. Now what I want to do is I want to draw out my classes and the things that I'm going to do. So let's just do something that might be a bit more interesting to you, like your character. You have a character of a story or a book, or you yourself is a character. So let's say I just sort of draw my character out, right? I'm not going to do anything too fancy. And this character has a name. So these are some of the attributes, right? This will be the encapsulated field. So this would be a character class. Move this up a little bit. So this is my character class. The character class will have a name, and let's say the character class will have a health. And the name will be a string, and the health will be an integer. So we're doing this all on paper. We want the health to be an integer in case we want to be able to take health away, or we want to do some calculations. So we make that an integer. The name itself is going to be a string because we don't need to do any calculations on it. And so this is a class. Now, remember, a class is a what? A blueprint. Okay? That means this person doesn't quite exist yet. It's just an idea, and it's breaking it up in many different ways. So we want to be able to create this person. And whenever you create a class, it's going to become an object. But when it becomes an object, there's something called a constructor. That's the first thing that runs when a class becomes an object. And we're going to add a constructor for our character when he's created, or he or she or whatever is created. And so the constructor will be the same name as the class. You're going to see this when we do it in code. So you'll have the name of the class, then you'll have a constructor. So we have our character constructor. And whatever we want to happen. So as soon as he comes to life, as soon as this character is created, this will run. That's the first thing that will run. And that's basically a function inside every class has a constructor. Whether you see it or not, it still has one. Now, our character has an attribute, and I don't want to make this too sloppy, so I'm going to get rid of some of this. Get rid of that. Our character has these attributes here, and also our character has an action, and that action is going to be this is a method, and it's going to be an action. We're going to call that attack. So that's what our character can do. This is what our character has. This is what our character can do. Maybe the character can even talk. See, so we can keep on going down different methods. So now that we have this written out, and you obviously want to write yours out a little bit more, you might want to put some weaponry here so you can see what the attack would be. You know, don't go too crazy, because you don't want to spend a bunch of time on this right off the bat. You can come back to this documentation later. Maybe you want to give them some kind of hat. Okay, so there we have it. And, you know, maybe he has some pads on or something. Whatever. You get the idea. All right, so now that we have our documentation done, we'll make some more documentation. You will scribble some notes on here. You'll have your README file, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Now we can go ahead and go to code. So we want to personify our code like we would for object-oriented programming. So we're going to make those now into boxes, and this will be our character. You know, as I'm trying to be a little bit more careful here because these need to be more precise. And in this, we'll have a string, and we'll have an integer. Okay? Talk. And then we'll have the attack. So all that would be in our character class. Okay? So that's the last thing you need to do. You don't have to worry about anything else. We're not getting too complicated. I just want you to go through the motions. Now let's go ahead and look at some examples of this in code. So I'm here in Visual Studio 2022. If you have 2019, it'll still work, but I'm using 2022. I'm going to go here and start up 2022, and I'm going to hit Create New Project. You should be a bit familiar with this. Hit Create New Project, and we can create a WPF application. So if you see these here, if you recently opened some, it's going to be here. But if you don't, then you can go here and hit C#, go to the drop down and go to Windows, go to this drop down, the final third drop down, and go to Desktop. Now you can go and use any of these templates. The template we want is the WPF framework. So we're going to use that for now. We can use others, but for this one, we're going to use the WPF app.net framework. I'm going to double click that. And now I can give this a name. Give it whatever name you want. Make sure it's something that's memorable, something that's going to win you $1 million. Once you have that, then you go ahead and put it there. And if you can't come up with something that's going to make you $1 million, maybe just come up with something where you owe money. I'm just joking. Just put anything there. So here we go. I'm going to say my character app or game or whatever. Make sure you put where you want to save that, and you're going to place all of that in your solution and the project in one directory, in the same directory. And the framework is fine, and hit create. Okay, so once that happened, you should see this here, right? So, and again, this is something you should be familiar with. This is not a very intro video, but just for the sake of some people may not remember everything, and you may just be getting back into it, but this is your IDE, your integrated development environment. This is where you'll be creating all your applications. Here we have our code behind, and here we have our user interface. So that's these tabs up here. On the right-hand side, you have your Solutions Explorer. The Solutions Explorer will have all the files that you need for your applications, but don't let these confuse you. Right now, what we only are concerned with is the main window. And if I click on this drop-down, not drop-down, but I mean a little arrow, we have our MainWindow.xaml.cs. That's going to be your code. That's what these two represent here, up here. So if I double-click on this, you'll see it'll go right to that tab. And if I double-click on this one, it goes to this tab. Now, down here, what you're looking at, it looks almost like HTML. And it basically almost does the same thing. Obviously, it does a lot more, but it's like the same thing. It's defining what you see here. So as I add things here, it's going to automatically add it here. But I can also type things here and make it come up here. So you just want to be aware of that. And with this interface, you can actually change the size of the windows and drag windows around and stuff like that. But we don't want to get into those details. Before we do anything, you want to go to your toolbox. You want to click on that. And once it's open, you're going to go over here and click on this little auto hide thing here. And we want that to be pinned. So we want it to pin. From there, you're all set. If I were to click on something in here like this grid, you'll see the properties show up over here. If I click on this window right here, you'll see the Windows properties show up over here. In essence, whatever I click on, the properties of that thing shows up here. And the properties have a bunch of stuff up in there. Brush, layout, text, appearance. For instance, if I can go to this brush, I can actually change the look of the background just by going to that brush. We're not really focusing on that right now, but you get the idea. Now, if I were to just not type anything or do anything, and I were to run this, I actually have a working application. You see, I have a window. It says main window, and the color's there. That's all my application does. And I'm thinking about putting it on the App Store for $10 million. I don't know, maybe I'll sell a few. But, you know, I don't want to be too crazy about it. So let's go ahead and add some stuff to this. Now, we want to go ahead and try out our new understanding of object-oriented programming and add ourselves a character class. So here's how we would do this. We go here to our main window. And if you notice here, this main window is a class. It's a class for the main window. This main window inherits from the base class window. So it adds to the base class. Remember, we talked about inheritance and that sort of thing. And it has this this property here. This is the constructor. How do we know it's the constructor? Because it has the exact same name as the class. So whatever we do in here, it's what's going to happen when this thing is it runs. But what we want is our own class to work alongside this. And what I'm going to do is see right here, this is a class. So it says public partial class, and we can see it starts here and it ends here. And this right here is a namespace. We'll talk about that later. It starts there and it ends here. What I want to do is I want to go over here and look. I have my main window class and I have my main window class here. I want to go ahead and create my own class. So I'm going to go here to my properties, right click, and then I'm going to go to add, new item, and then up here to class. Then I can go ahead and give that class a name. I want to call this class according to our documentation. So it was called character. Remember we were creating a character class. I can click enter, and now I have my character class. Now, if you remember what we had in this character class, the character class had two properties, right? It has a string, which was a name, and a health. So I want to say private string, and I want to call that name. Okay. And then I'm going to say private int health. Oops. Yeah, health. Now, if you notice what I'm doing here, these names are lowercase. The reason why they're lowercase is because any name that's private, and this is, each company might do it a little bit different, but the private names you want lowercase, and the public names you want to be capitalized initially. Now let's talk about our constructor. Remember, we know our constructor will have the exact same name, but what does the constructor do? The constructor activates when the class is created. So I'm going to go ahead and create a constructor in here, and we already know the constructor has to have the same name. And we'll talk more about this later, but just follow along with me. Just understand that when this class is created, this is what's going to run. This constructor takes in two variables, the name and the health. And it takes those two variables from whoever's using this class. It brings them in, and it applies it to the internal private methods. I'm sorry, not methods, but properties here. Now, we also said that our character had talk. It can talk, right? So a method, right? So I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to say public, so that anyone who uses this class will have access to this talk method. I'm going to say void, which means it doesn't return anything. It's just going to do something. So it's more like a procedure. And I'm going to say talk. And then open and close. Oops. There we go. So now we have a talk method. It doesn't do anything right now. There's nothing in there. But we have it, and it's publicly available to anyone who wants to use it. Now, I'm just going to do a console write line in here, so that way when we use it, we'll know what's happening. And I can say something like this. I'm going to put a $sign in front of this, so that way I can write it in more natural terms. And open and close those brackets, and I'm going to put the name there, which is this variable here. I'm putting name there. It's going to print the name. But I don't just want name. I want it within the context of a sentence. So whatever the person's name is has a particular number for their health. So that number is going to, whatever number that was in here will show up here. And then the words health. Let me put that in the quotes. And then we'll say points, yes. So it has that many health points. And this will make more sense when we start running it. So that's our talk method. That's another thing a person can do, right, in our class, is we said attack. So we're going to say public. That's the scope, meaning this is accessible to anyone outside of our class. And it doesn't return anything. And it's called attack. Now you notice these are public. And so again with this one, it really doesn't do anything. So we're going to do a console.writeLine, and we want to basically do this same thing here, and we're going to do that down here. And I'd rather you not copy paste. I'd rather you actually type it out, because it's going to make you much better and help you not memorize, but get comfortable with the code. I'm not interested in you memorizing, but I am comfortable with having you understand the code, knowing where to get your references, and implementing an idea, making sure you find your way to the completion of it. So we have this console write line, and that will say something like, first I'm going to put my $sign, because the reason why I'm doing a $sign, because basically I'm going to be using some variables in this string. And then I can say the person's name or the character's name, right? That character's name attacks something. Let's say attacks with a basic strike. And that's not a sentence. It's more like attacks with a basic strike, like I'm screaming off top of my lungs. All right, so there we have it. Now we actually have ourselves character class. And from this character class, we can create wizard classes, we can create warrior classes, that sort of stuff. And we'll do that in a little bit. But for right now, let's look at how we can implement this inside of one of those other classes. So here I have my character class. I'm going to now go up here and I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new class. Now I can go here and create a new item again, or I can just go down here and click on the class and it automatically brings me to that next spot. So what kind of class do I want to create? I said before that we can create a wizard class, correct? So I'm going to put that as a wizard. Now, how do we inherit everything that this has and put it, and let me put this, I'm gonna drag this tab over so we can see both of them. You don't have to do that, but I'm just dragging it over. So now I have my wizard class over here and I have my character class over here. So how can I have a wizard inherit from the character class? Because what am I saying? I'm saying a wizard definitely has a name and it has a health. A wizard can attack and a wizard can talk. Every character in my game, every character that I'm programming for can do all of these things. This is why I created this base class, right? And so now I want the wizard to be able to at least do that and do what wizards do. And so from there, I'm going to implement that. First of all, I don't want this called internal class. I mean, it could be, but I don't want it to be. So I'm just going to call this public class wizard. Okay. And now this is how I'm going to inherit from the character class. I'm going to put the colon and I'm going to put character. Basically inherit from the character class. And now what I need is I need my constructor. So the constructor is going to be public. Oops. Public wizard. Remember, because it has the same name. That's the name. And then that wizard will start off by taking a string, which is going to be the name. And it's going to take a int, which is going to be the health. And it's going to take, it's going to just take those two, but it's going to take it from the base class. So this is how we're going to implement the first part of the wizard class. Right now we have these little wiggly lines here because it's saying that this wizard class is not as accessible as the main class that it's inheriting from. So what I have to do is either just go back to my character class and I'm just going to change that to public. And I'm going to save that. And over here, you'll see now the wizard is fixed. But there is something I want in my wizard that I already have here. So in my base class, I have this attack, right? So if I also have it here because this is inheriting from the character class. But I want my attack to do something different in the wizard class. I don't want it to do what it's doing in the base class. So for the warrior, I want the attack to do something different. For the wizard, I want the attack to do something different. So I'm going to do something called overriding. And this is where polymorphism kicks in. So I can still implement this same attack in my wizard class, but have it do something slightly different. So there's a couple of things we want to address here. Right now, this says public override, and there's a little squiggly lines here because what we're trying to do is we're trying to override the attack that comes with this base class, which is our main class over here. Okay, so what I want to be able to do is I am going to take this here, and I have to convert the base class to virtual so someone else can override that attack. Right now, I have this attack action here. I'm just going to put virtual right there and save that. And now you can see over here, once I save it, over here, those squiggly lines are gone. Now, we have squiggly lines on this name, as we talked about earlier, because this name is protected over here. I'm trying to access this private name here. So it's saying I don't have access to that. The only way I can have access to a name like this is one, go over here and make this public. I want you to see this. Make that public. Now the character will allow me to have access to this name. I go back here and there's no issue. But I don't want to do that because I was trying to hide the name from everyone else. That's the inner workings idea that we talked about earlier in the presentation. So I'm going to put that back to private, and I'm going to come over here and make my own private name here. Okay. So that way, when the wizard is initially created, I can literally go ahead and add that name that comes from here into here. So there's both of them are called names. So I'm just going to do something like this. This name equals the name in here. That means this name right here is here. And this, that keyword means this class. So this class's name right there will equal the name that comes in here. And I can do that with the health as well. And we're going to go more in detail with this, but for right now, we have our wizard class, we have our character class, and we have our main window class. So let's go use these. Let's go use our wizard class and our character class in our main class. So I can go ahead and go back to my main window class here. And in this main window, I'm going to create a function, and that function is going to be called, let's say, let's say start, or not start, but let's say something like InitCharacter. Okay, so that's going to be the name of it. So I'm going to call that, I'll make that public void InitCharacter. And in this, we're going to take it from a blueprint to an actual object. Here, this character class is our blueprint. This wizard class is a blueprint. Okay? We're going to now go from a blueprint to an actual object. And first, we declare the variable. And the variable is going to be of a type. You know, like if I were to say int age, right? That's a type. That's a type integer. That's the name age. The type is integer. If I were to say something like string name, then the string is the type. The name is the name of the variable, right? So instead of int and instead of string, we want of a different type. We want it of the type that we just created, this class here. And that type is character. So instead of saying int or integer, I'm going to say character. So that's the type. And I'll call this wizard. That's going to be that character type that I'm about to do. And now this is the keyword I use to be able to bring this to becoming an object. The keyword is new. We use that to take something from being a blueprint to being an actual object. So I'm going to say a new, what did we just create? Wizard. And the constructor of that wizard takes a name and a health. So inside of the parentheses here, I'm going to put name, and that's a string. And the health is an integer, so I'm going to put a number. And now we just created our first wizard here. Now, what can this wizard do? This wizard can attack, but also this wizard, based on our character here, remember, is inheriting the talk as well. Even though we don't see it here, it inherits it from the character class. So we don't have to rewrite it unless we were going to overload it. So I can do something like this. I can say wizard dot talk, and you see it has a talk in the wizard, even though we don't have it in our main class, because the wizard inherits from the character class, and the character class has a talk. The character class has an attack. But the issue here is that we did not want the attack to be the same attack here. We wanted it to be special for the wizard. So we overrode the attack to have the wizard do its own version of the attack, which makes this polymorphism overriding. So now we have that. Now let's see what happens when we run it. So I'm going to run my application, hit Control S. And this is going to go to the console, but I'll show you how we can get it to the interface in a minute. So I'm going to hit run or play. Now, when this plays, my application plays, in order for me to see what's in the console, I got to go down here to the output. So if we look closely, we can see right there, Malik has 100 health points. I'm going to stop that. So we have our wizard class, we have our character class, we have our main window class, and we're working with those things in our main program application. And later what we can do is we can, instead of making this talk and going to the console, what we want to be able to do is make this go out to the main window. We'll probably do that next time, but this will give you a really good understanding of object-oriented programming, polymorphism, and all the other things that we talked about before. We have them all basically in this application, inheritance, so on and so forth, everything we talked about in the beginning of the video. So I think it'll be a good idea for you as practice to create your own class. So we have a wizard class, so why not create a warrior class or an elf class or whatever kind of class of character you have in your story, or whatever kind of class of character you want to create. You might have cyborgs, you might have aliens, whatever it might be. And follow along with this. And it's, you know, in the beginning, you're not really going to understand everything. I understand that. But follow along, start tinkering with it, and at least try to make your own class. And if it doesn't work, just delete it, you know, start over again. At least you have this base to start with. So there you have it. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. And make sure you subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time.